Welcome to our virtual hayride. I've had some criticisms here recently. Where's the hay? Well, we had hay for a while. The cats loved it. People didn't like it near as much after that, and so we couldn't use it very often. But we still call this a hayride, like, hey there. It's our hey there hayride. We're headed down the gravel road now. This is, surprisingly enough, a state highway, 1567. And it runs from by the orchard, and that's the only building except our office that's on the whole road. So it's mainly used as a recreational road. People walking, running along the road in the daytime, and at night people in their automobiles getting better acquainted down this lover's lane at night. It's a very important road, though. It follows a trail that the Over Mountain men used to come across the mountain and go look for Ferguson, catching up with him at Kings Mountain. So some of the stories I tell are about people involved in the Over Mountain men and in the battle. And one is John Sevier. I like to tell about John. The Indians, of course, were trying to attack the settlers that were in the territory they'd been promised by King George III. So the settlers had set up forts that they could run into. And on this particular event, the whole community was inside the fort and safe, except when John got up on the side and looked out, and he saw Bonnie Kate Sherrill, Catherine Sherrill, but Bonnie Kate's her nickname, and I love that nickname. Bonnie Kate Sherrill outside the fort, being chased by Indians. Bonnie Kate had not heard the alarm and had not gotten to the fort before the door was closed. So now the Indians were hoping and herding her toward the door, hoping someone would open the door and let Bonnie Kate come in, and they could take over the fort and do whatever they wanted with the occupants. So nobody was going to open the door. And what that meant was Bonnie Kate was going to be captured and killed by the Indians. But John had a plan. He called to her. She came running over to where he was on the side of the fort. He reached down as far as he could. He's just a sort of a short fella, and his arms didn't go far enough. She jumped up, and they couldn't quite touch. It looked bad for Bonnie Kate. The Indians were coming quickly. They saw what she was trying to do. John had two friends with him, and one grabbed him by one ankle and the other by the other ankle, and they dangled him head first over the side of the fort. He reached out, grabbed Bonnie Kate by the arm, pulled her to safety inside the fort. Well, a short time later, actually 4 years, they turned out to be a bride and groom. He married her after his first wife died. So now John has Bonnie Kate safely inside the fort, and I can go on and tell you other stories about the people and the places involved in this orchard. As we're going down the road here, you'll see on our right-hand side, my right-hand side, the apples that are growing right now. Apples are strange critters, I learned. You have to have just the right kind of weather around their blooms. And then you also have to be kind of careful for not allowing too much rain or not enough rain. Now, I haven't figured out exactly how to control that yet. We're still working on that part. One lesson that I usually find a lot of people don't understand. If you get an apple and you like the taste of that apple and you save the seeds and you plant them, you'll get an apple tree, but it won't taste anything at all like the apples that you ate to get that tree. Every single seed brings a different apple tree if it's planted. It's sort of like families on the human side. Nobody is exactly like his parent. The parents are different. And mostly, even with twins, they're not exactly the same. But with apples, the apples that grow that way are almost always too bitter for people to eat. They're called spitters in the apple world, and you can hardly get a good tasting apple from a seed. Matter of fact, 999 out of 1,000 of those are going to be spitters if you plant a seed. So, you know, in this country, in this continent, there were no apples until the settlers came. And at first, they could only carry seeds, not enough room even for cuttings from those trees. So they came and planted the seeds, and only a few apples out of the thousands of seeds that they planted were really good. But they have become heirloom apples, and some of them, the first ones that made good apples in this continent, carried from seeds across the ocean. Two of them are planted in our orchard now. The seeds having been good trees, and then cuttings from the trees grafted onto rootstock or other trees, and they've survived to this day. But most of them weren't very good. So you might ask, what was Johnny Appleseed all about? He got the seeds and planted them, and if they were all bad like that, how did he get by with it? What did he do with them? Well, he was a good businessman. And Johnny Appleseed lived at the time when the states of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois were being settled, and the government had decided to give land to farmers who improved the land enough to deserve 600 acres or a section of land in those states. Johnny would go ahead of the settlements, plant seeds. Maybe 4 or 5 years later, when the settlers began to get that far west, they had to have an apple tree, or at least a fruit tree of some kind, growing on the land, or they would not qualify to receive land grants. So John would sell them apples, and they would use the apples in their grants. But every once in a while they'd get good apple, and that would become a standard. There have been, somebody has estimated 4,000 old-time apples that have been prepared and still grown. But that is a large number, and they die if you don't graft one of those trees for the next generation. Well, the other use of those spitter apples out on the frontier with John Appleseed was hard cider. Hard cider was used almost everywhere as the drink. I don't mean alcoholic drink, I mean all drink of the day, because the farmers soon learned that a lot of the water sources were contaminated. So the whole frontier got by on a buzz. Men, women, and even children, to drink something safe. So that's how Johnny Appleseed got his importance. I'd point out one apple here that is an old apple. It was first grown here in this, well, first grown in the whole world, up near York, Pennsylvania, on a farm owned by a farmer named Johnson. And that apple was good enough that people would come to his tree, cut cuttings off his tree, and plant them, or rather graft them. And so that's how he recognized he had a winner. So he started propagating the tree also. And the apples were kind of strange shaped, flat on the top and bottom, not curved like you picture an apple. And so because of their strange shape and where they were found, they were first called the lop-eared Johnson. Well, I can picture the marketing meeting. Marketing manager said, "I cannot sell lop-eared Johnsons. You're going to have to rename these apples." They were renamed the York Imperial. And the York Imperial, or York for short, is one of the most trees that we have growing on the orchard. You see, back before we took the orchard over, long before, the York apple was used in Gerber baby food, for baby food to eat. And that's because the apple is sort of a neutral flavor when it's first ripe. And the apple sauce was neither tart nor sweet. The apples were prized on the frontier and out here before refrigeration because they were tough apples and they would last for at least from the time they were picked in the fall at least to the spring, and especially if you kept them in your spring house. So the York apple was a very useful apple. Unfortunately, the use of it dwindled at the time we took over this orchard. York was no longer using it for baby food. They were buying imported apple product from China. And we who depended on selling a lot to York had to look elsewhere for our support.